All of our gyrocopters are accounted for. I'm Charlie Sykes. Sunday Insight starts right now. Good morning and welcome to Sunday Insight. In the week that was, at long last, Hillary Clinton makes it official. She's running. So does Florida Senator Marco Rubio. The new poll shows a slipping approval rating for Governor Scott Walker back home. And on the new Bucks Arena, the same poll shows overwhelming opposition to public sector support. But the real story of the week was an explosion of violence here and the war of words that followed. 7 murders in just 48 hours, a stabbing, a beating, and shootings, including an accident that led to 4 deaths last Sunday. It begins this way. A 2-year-old child darts in front of a van and is killed. The driver stops and tries to help. He is shot and killed by the boy's uncle, who also shoots and kills the boy's 15-year-old brother. The shooter, Ricky Childs, is a convicted felon out of prison on probation after getting only a 2-year sentence. When police catch up with him, he kills himself. Mayor Tom Barrett responds by lashing out at Governor Walker and the legislature.
This community has to face a reality that the gun laws that this state has put forward over the last few years, as proud as it makes the governor and the legislature feel, has resulted in more guns on the streets of the city of Milwaukee. And if they're proud that there are more guns on the streets of the city of Milwaukee, and occasionally you're going to have someone who's going to use a gun and it's going to stop a crime, but we know what's happened. What's happened is there have been more and more shootings.
Panel this morning, defense attorney Dan Adams, former state representative Michelle Litchens, political strategist Linda Bruin, and media trackers Brian Sikma. Brian, what was the mayor talking about there?
Well, the mayor was talking about something he's been talking about since 2011, when the city of Milwaukee began registering and lobbying on gun bills, and Madison trying to devote their efforts to stop crime in Milwaukee on lobbying policymakers of Madison. Since then, they've lobbied on 17 bills. This is a mayor who, time and time again, as soon as a gun crime comes up in Milwaukee, he'd rather focus on other political leaders instead of taking action in his own backyard.
Was he implying? He appeared to be implying somehow that the concealed carry law was leading to this. I don't know that any of the murders that have taken place, and there are 43 murders so far, have been committed by anybody who was holding a concealed carry permit.
No, Charlie, and the fact of the matter is, we at Media Trackers looked at gun crime last year in the city of Milwaukee. We looked at 2013 in particular because that's the last full year for which we have data. And we found out that in almost half of the instances of gun crimes being used to commit a homicide, the individual carrying that firearm was already a felon. They shouldn't have had the weapon in the first place. Okay. And time again, District Attorney John Chisholm doesn't prosecute those crimes.
Dan Adams, you're a defense attorney?
Defense attorney, and I was a prosecutor for 4 years, and so I've seen this from both angles. And what I've come down with from my firsthand experience is that this is not really a political issue. So it kind of sickens me that all the politicians are now finger pointing at each other. This is not a political issue. This is a cultural issue that we have in Milwaukee County. We have people who do not value each other, and they want to earn respect by spraying bullets into their community.
But you do have the mayor. But the mayor, who the buck stops with the mayor, in theory, chose to have that press conference where he pointed the fingers, implying somehow that there's some law on the books. There's not a law on the books that would have made a difference. I would be interested in knowing, from the mayor's point of view, what law would have prevented Ricky Childs from having that gun? Because Ricky Childs was not a concealed carry permit holder. He was a convicted felon. It was a felony for him to have that gun. And yet none of the political leaders are willing to say, hey, how about the plea bargain? How about the light sentence that led to Ricky Childs being out on the street, Linda Bruin?
Well, actually, I agree with you on this. And I do think, in fairness to the mayor, he also pointed out the ultimate responsibility is Ricky Childs.
Well, yes, of course.
And so, but both sides have a point. In the United States, we have more guns and more murders than other places in the world who have fewer guns. True. But is the NRA and people who are pro-gun rights responsible for these murders? No.
Okay, Michelle Litchens.
Yeah, this is just the typical liberal mantra. They're blaming everyone else for the problems that are going on in Milwaukee. They're blaming the NRA. The NRA actually wants to have criminals prosecuted for gun crimes. He's blaming Scott Walker and the Republicans in Madison. The Republicans in Madison have actually done more to stop crime in Milwaukee than the mayor has by supporting the Shot Spotter program.
I get that the mayor and Chief Ed Flynn really hate the NRA. I get this. I don't think this is a Second Amendment issue. It's a common sense issue. And the question is, what are we going to do about this revolving door criminal justice system that we have here, this catch and release? And the reality is that a lot of these gun crimes that they want to have on the books are being tossed or being plea bargained down by the prosecutors. And I thought that Sheriff Clark made a great point, saying, look, if we can't even put somebody who is arrested and convicted of armed robbery behind bars for a long time, why does Chief Flynn and the mayor think that we are going to be putting somebody, behind bars just for carrying a gun? So Dan Adams, maybe you have some insight into this, though. What is responsible for this? I mean, I understand that what the mayor was really doing there was, it's not my fault, don't blame me. Don't blame me for the cutbacks in the police department, for the furloughing of police. Don't blame me for spending money on the trolley, not on cops. But what is actually happening in Milwaukee right now?
There's blame to go around.
Yeah, right.
Sheriff Clark is also saying, don't blame me.
Right.
We have an AG who promised that he would help with gun
But what is happening? I mean, we're having an explosion right now.
We knew this was going to be a long summer.
Yeah.
It always is. When the weather gets nice, violence, unfortunately, in urban areas takes off.
But it's April.
It's going to be a long summer. This is a cultural issue. Ricky Childs was a coward and a creep, and the only reason that he was not in prison was in a previous case, he testified against another creep and bought himself some release. That's an important point.
Well, he was out because he was originally charged with a felony that could have kept him behind bars for 40 years. They amended it down to a felony that could have put him behind bars for 15 years, and DA John Chisholm and Judge Rick Sankovitz decided to let him out after just 2 years.
Because he testified against another creep.
Charlie, there's also something wrong with how the laws in our state are written and enforced. In our state, if you're caught with marijuana twice, it's a felony. Right. But if you're caught carrying an illegal handgun, not a legal handgun, or illegally carrying a gun, then it's not a felony. And so the reality of that is you've got to guess what? If you
shooting people is a felony,
if you follow the gun laws, I'm perfectly fine with that. But if you don't follow the gun laws and use those guns illegally or use an illegal gun, there's got to be stiffer penalties for that. Felons who use guns go to prison. The gun itself
is never illegal. It is the guys who do it. And the problem is that we have too many criminals with guns who are arrested, who are in prison, and who are let loose. What is your glass half full? What is your glass half empty this week? Let's go around the table, Dan Adams.
Well, my glass is half full because since 2009, there's been a huge downward trend in the increases in Medicare spending. $316 billion were not spent because of a downward trend. That's 240 times the annual budget of the city of Milwaukee. My glass is half empty because we are talking about a downward trend in increases in spending. Actual dollars spent continues to rise, just at a slower clip.
Michelle Litchens.
My glass is half full because Wisconsin's jobless rate fell to a 4.6%, which is our lowest rate since before the recession. It is half empty because we still have too many manufacturing jobs going unfilled.
Linda Bruin.
Well, my glass is running over because a new Marquette poll brings some great news for Wisconsin Democrats. In Wisconsin, Governor Walker's job approval rating is plummeting. Hillary Clinton would trounce him in a presidential bid, and Russ Feingold would tromp Ron Johnson. Well, my glass is wobbly because this is one poll from April 2015. Election day is far away.
Brian Sickma.
Well, my glass is half full because the Indiana State Senate just passed legislation repealing that state's prevailing wage law. My glass is half empty because if Wisconsin doesn't also pass such reform, taxpayers here will continue to pay overinflated prices for public construction projects.
Well, my glass is half full because a surveillance tape at an auto impound lot caught the obnoxious and insulting behavior of ESPN reporter Britt McHenry, leading to her 1-week suspension. It's half empty, though, because that videotape was edited so we don't see what the employees of the impound lot said or how they behaved. Now, that may not make Britt McHenry look any better, but we really did only get half of the story. Next on Sunday Insight, is the city of Milwaukee safe despite the explosion of violence this week? Last week, 7 murders brought Milwaukee's total to 43 so far this year, up from 14 a year ago. But that doesn't count all of the violence. More non-fatal shootings, a little girl shot and wounded in her home, a police shooting of a man who tried to rob a Walgreens, an explosion of auto thefts, a carjacking ends in a crash at 60th and Capitol. But wait, says Mayor Barrett, the city is safe. Is the city safe? Do people feel that it's safe, Linda Bruin?
Wow. I think that, like in a lot of urban areas, that answer, frankly and sadly, depends on where you live and where you work. I've had a daughter in the car driving home in the middle of the day, going through a bad neighborhood, and shots erupting right outside of my car. Where I used to live in the city of Milwaukee, my home was burglarized 3 times in 1 year. Where I live now, it's also in the city of Milwaukee, it is so safe. My kids don't need to lock their house.
Here's the reality. Downtown Milwaukee is safe. People should not avoid downtown Milwaukee because of high crime, because there is not a lot of crime downtown.
Right.
But as we've learned before, and we've learned many, many times, perception can become reality. And I think we're getting very, very close to a tipping point where there are a lot of people who might be outside of the city who are going, you know what, right now it's too sketchy, I'm not going there. What do you think?
I was just going to say that. Is it safe? I don't know. It's the perception, right? And you have to still drive through the city to get yourself downtown. Do you feel safe driving through the city? And if people stop driving through the city to get down there, I mean, how much is the city going to suffer financially?
Well, and a lot of the things that don't even make the news, you know, a kid who's beaten up and robbed in Shorewood, or the case in Menominee Falls, which did get publicity, where a woman is almost carjacked with her 4-year-old daughter. These are the kinds of things that I think are adding to the perception that there needs to be more aggressive action. Dan Adams.
Well, sure, yeah. We always hear the bad stories, and that's kind of our media in 2015. You never hear about the neighbor who's helping the other neighbor, or any of the positive things that are happening in Milwaukee. Milwaukee's a terribly safe community.
Terribly safe
community?
Absolutely.
I live in the city. I walk around all parts of the city, and I never feel
okay, then I want to ask you a question. And you're a lawyer. You're driving through the central city, and kid darts out behind a car. You hit that child.
Well, that's a huge question.
Do you stay, or do you run the risk of being charged with hit and run? Because we know what happened. We know that gentleman last week, 1 week ago, if he would have been done a hit and run, he'd be alive today. No, a number of other people would be alive today.
It was a terrible situation with a psychopath who obviously had access to a gun.
Do you stop?
At this point, I think I go down the block and I call the police.
So you don't stop. Mr. Dan Adams, who says absolutely nothing to see, the city is so safe, but you would risk hit and run because, in fact, it is not safe.
Based on your worst case scenario.
Okay, Brian Sykes. I just dropped the microphone right there.
Well, the bottom line, Charlie, is Mayor Tom Barrett wants to make Milwaukee safe by saying it is so. Right. But time and time again, he has refused to accept responsibility for making this city a safer place, and that in and of itself, his lack of responsibility, is fatal to the city of Milwaukee.
Actually, I think that's the scary thing, is that you need to have some sense that somebody is going to do something about it. If you won't acknowledge your responsibility, then you're not going to take the steps. And as Dan said before, though, this is going to be potentially a long, hot summer, and I am seeing no sense of responsibility or leadership.
They have a website.
Right. They have a website. You may not want to hear it this week, but we're going to tell you anyway. Let's hand out some unsolicited advice. Dan Adams, you're first.
If you read a single news article about Hillary Clinton's incognito trip to Chipotle this week, my advice, please visit your local bookstore or public library, because you're in desperate need of some better reading material.
Michelle Legends.
My advice is to Mayor Barrett, please pay more attention to protecting your citizens than securing money for a streetcar that goes in a circle.
Linda Bruin.
During the trial, Aaron Hernandez's defense team got damning evidence excluded, made key prosecution witnesses look foolish, and showed Hernandez had no motive. But even keeping Hernandez from testifying couldn't stop the jury from seeing his indifference and arrogance. This is a reminder that you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig.
Brian Sickman.
My unsolicited advice is to liberal protesters in both Madison and Milwaukee, who this week blocked traffic in their respective cities by protesting in the streets. If you want to win converts to your cause, don't create traffic jams, guys.
All right, my unsolicited advice is to Mark Lazary. Look, we get it that you really, really like Hillary Clinton, but it's a bit tone deaf to announce that you are going to raise more than $250,000 for Hillary in 1 week while you're trying to get the taxpayers to publicly finance your new Bucks Arena. And you need to get that corporate welfare through a Republican legislature and a Republican governor who is also running for president. Not a wizard move. Next on Sunday Insight, surprising results from a poll on public support for financing that new arena in downtown Milwaukee. No, there's no election, but that doesn't mean there's not another poll. Last week's Marquette law poll showed that Scott Walker's approval rating has dropped to 41%, with 55% disapproving. The poll also showed Republican Senator Ron Johnson trailing former Senator Russ Feingold by a margin of 54% to 38%. But the real eye-opener, Only 17% of Wisconsinites support public support for a new Bucks arena. 79% oppose. Even in Milwaukee, the poll found more than 66% opposed to public financing. And outstate, the opposition is even greater. Outside of Milwaukee, 87% of Wisconsinites say they are against the public financing proposals. Ouch, Dan Adams.
Well, there's not good numbers at all.
Yeah.
But I questioned the format of the actual question posed to the voters. It said basically, do you support borrowing for the arena? And of course, voters say no. I don't want it. Reactionary, no. What if the question was, do you support the Bucks leaving town? I think you'd see the exact flip-flop of that.
You're running that.
That's what the issue would be. Do you support borrowing from the arena? And it's even worse news because back in June of last year, 63% of state folks opposed it. So the opposition is growing, and politicians on both sides will be taking notice of that.
Okay, does this make a difference in Madison right now when you see numbers like that?
I certainly think it does. I think especially when you need out-state legislators to support spending money on this arena. At the same time, the arena doesn't have a cheerleader, and I think people in Milwaukee still have a bad taste in their mouth from the Miller Park sales tax that hasn't gone away.
Yeah.
Well, and something to keep in mind here, as Dana mentioned, the poll question was a little confusing because the latest plan at least talks about taking money from the Board of Commissioners of Public Lands and loaning that to the Bucks, making sure that gets paid back. It's a very complicated plan, but it's hard to test a poll question. I think the best option would be if somebody like BMO Harris stepped forward and said, hey, we'd love to do private financing for a project like this.
Dan, the only way they could have changed the questioning would you favor a new public support for a Bucks arena if you also get a free unicorn and get to date Olivia Munn? That is the only way, and you probably get just a plurality then. What is it you don't get this week? Let's go around the table. Dan Adams, you're first.
Charlie, I don't get how the right calls Hillary Clinton a socialist bent on state control and the left thinks she's a Wall Street shill and neocon. Could it be that she's actually a pragmatic, problem-solving centrist?
No.
No.
No, but thanks for asking. Michelle Litchens?
What I don't get is why the Republican-led Senate doesn't want to have sanctions against failing schools. If there's no teeth in a school accountability bill, where is the accountability?
Linda Bruin.
Well, what I don't get is the logic behind a new Kansas law that has the toughest restrictions in the nation on how poor families can spend their public assistance dollars. The Republican legislature and governor wanted to make sure that welfare dollars are only spent on life's necessities. So Kansas poor folk can't go to a swimming pool, see a concert, or even buy underwear using public assistance. But they can use the money to buy guns. Wow.
Brian Sickma.
Well, what I don't get is why liberals are advocating for a $15 an hour minimum wage hike when such a wage increase would cost Wisconsin 91,000 jobs, according to a study by the MacIver Institute. Such a move would be a step backward, not forward.
Well, what I don't get is when Mayor Tom Barrett will say the buck stops here on anything, ever. Next on Sunday Inside, our panel picks the winners and losers of the week. But first, here's your morning news update. It's time for our panel to pick the winners and losers of the week. Dan Adams, you're first.
Well, my winner is Catherine Gale and her family, the now former owners of Gale Foods in Germantown. After selling their fourth-generation family business, the Gales showed extreme class by recognizing their employees in a big way with surprise $10,000 checks. My loser, State Representative Josh Zepnick, who failed to support a bipartisan bill, yes, they still exist, allowing popular ride-sharing services like Uber to exist statewide. Zepnick continues to display his anti-business zeal and lack of common sense.
Michelle Litchens.
My winner is Justice Patrick Crooks, a swing voter on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, for saying the court has become a laughingstock, or at least she has, in reference to Shirley Abrahamson. My loser is Mark Lasry, who pledged to raise $270,000 for Hillary Clinton this week, but he can't find time to raise money for a new arena.
Linda Bruin.
Well, my losers are average American employees whose CEOs earn nearly 300 times what they make. This pay gap is one of the largest in the world. My winners are two CEOs who decided to do something about it. Dan Price is the CEO of a Seattle-based firm who announced last week he was cutting his $1 million salary to $70,000 and that all 120 employees will now earn a minimum annual wage of $70,000. Catherine Gale is the CEO of Gale Foods in Germantown. When the company was sold last week, she handed her 370 employees envelopes containing up to $10,000. This added up to over $3 million in thank yous.
Brian Sickma.
Well, my winner this week is Florida Senator Marco Rubio. On Monday, Rubio announced his bid for the GOP presidential nomination in a powerful speech that shared his compelling life story as the son of Cuban immigrants and also shared his love of the great country he wants to run for president. My loser of the week is former Secretary of State and First Lady Hillary Clinton, who announced her presidential campaign last Sunday. Clinton's stale, contrived personality is boring, and her candidacy is as fresh as the 1990s.
Well, my winner is Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clark Jr., who's on the cover of the new National Review magazine. Clark is also the only local official who is willing to talk about plea bargains, light sentences, and our revolving door criminal justice system. Losers, Mayor Barrett and his police chief Ed Flynn. After one of the most violent weeks in this city's history, all we got from them was finger-pointing, excuses, and scapegoats. They sounded like men who are out of ideas. Maybe that's because they are. Thanks for joining us. Join me for my radio show Monday morning on News Radio 620 WTMJ from 8:30 until noon. Have a great week.